My name is Gideon Stritch. I'm a radiologist. I practiced for many years, and I'm now a coach who works exclusively with physicians. I want to start by saying something that I hope lands with recognition rather than resistance. Most of you in this room are working harder than anyone around you knows, and most of you are still behind. That's not a time management problem, and it's not a character flaw. Over the next 10 minutes, I want to show you what it actually is and what coaching can do about it. Here's our roadmap for the next 10 minutes. We're going to move quickly, but I want to make sure we get to the ROI section because I think that's where a lot of skepticism lives and it's worth addressing directly. Let's start with a question I want you to sit with for a moment. When was the last time you felt genuinely caught up? These are three things I often hear from my physician clients. I need better time management. I need to work harder. Everyone else seems to be managing. I hear these in the first session with almost every physician I work with. And here's what I want you to notice. All three of them are self-blame. They locate the problem inside the physician. They say, I am not enough. I am inefficient. I am failing at something others do fine. That framing is not just inaccurate, it's harmful. Because when you believe the problem is you, the solution becomes more of the same. More effort, more discipline, more grinding. And that's a loop with no exit. The real problem isn't individual, it's cultural. Medical training installs a particular operating system. You are trained to say yes to everything, to treat every task as urgent, to carry responsibility for every outcome, to never appear uncertain or overwhelmed. Over thousands of hours of training, that becomes automatic. You stop noticing it's happening. That's not poor time management. That's attention fragmentation built into the way you think. And here's the thing. You cannot manage your way out of a belief system. You need to examine it first. That's what coaching does. My coaching is not advice giving. I'm not going to tell you how to run your practice or optimize your EHR. What I do is more specific and, in my view, more useful. This is why 45 minutes every 2 weeks is enough. Because you're not learning new information, you're changing how you think. Let me give you a concrete look at what happens inside a session. Coaching sessions have a structure. The structure not only makes sense, but is based on the guidelines of the International Coaching Federation, which is the worldwide organization that certifies professional coaches. These 10 questions form the arc of a 45-minute coaching conversation. I generally move through them in order, but with flexibility depending on where the physician is. The session opens in the define phase. The very first question, what is most important here right now, sounds simple, but it is often the hardest. Physicians come in with a list of problems. This question asks them to choose one and to choose honestly. The next question digs one level deeper. What is the underlying tension? Often the presenting issue is not the real issue. A physician might come in saying, I can't keep up with charts, and what emerges is a deeper conflict between their identity as a clinician and the documentation demands of the institution. These questions set the direction for the session. What would success look like today? What do you want to walk away with after this session? This creates accountability and keeps us oriented. The middle phase, explore, is where the most consequential work happens. Question 5, what happens if nothing changes, is a futures question. It helps the physician feel the weight of inaction. We surface the limiting beliefs and test them directly. Is this actually true? What evidence is there? What would be true if the opposite were the case? Many physicians have never had their core assumptions examined out loud. Sometimes I use various techniques, including neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, to dissolve underlying limiting beliefs and emotions. The final phase is commit. We identify one concrete next step, small and specific. Then comes the most important question I ask. Are you really willing to do it? When? Not, are you going to try? Willing. That distinction matters. The last two questions close the loop. How did we do on your goal for this session, and what are you taking with you? 10 questions, 45 minutes. But the frame changes how the physician thinks about the problem long after they leave the session. Now let's talk about the one question I know many of you are sitting with. This sounds thoughtful, but I don't have time for coaching. Let's look at the math. Here's what the commitment actually looks like: 45 minutes every other week. That's it. When you average it out across the year, 18 hours total, spread across 52 weeks, you are talking about 21 minutes per week. That is less than 0.5% of your work week. I say this not to minimize the commitment. I say it because I know your objection. You are busy. You are stretched. The idea of adding anything to your schedule feels impossible. But I want you to hold that number, 21 minutes, and bring it with you. Because the question isn't whether you can afford to invest 21 minutes a week. The question is what those 21 minutes return. Let me walk you through it. Documentation time. Most physicians I work with spend 60 to 90 minutes per week doing work they could have done faster. Not because they're slow, but because they're fragmented. They start a note, get interrupted, lose the thread, restart. When you learn to set priorities and protect your attention, documentation gets done at work, not at home. Evening time. When work is finished during the workday, evenings become yours again. That's not a small thing. That's the difference between being mentally present with your family and sitting at the kitchen table with your laptop. Mental bandwidth. This is harder to quantify, but it's where the real cost lives. When you're running an anxiety loop in the background about what's unfinished, what might go wrong, what you forgot, that consumes cognitive resources constantly. Reducing that loop doesn't just feel better, it makes you sharper. Weekends. Many physicians quietly spend 1 to 2 hours on weekend administrative catch-up. When work is better bounded, that time comes back. Consider this. You invest 21 minutes per week. Conservative estimates put the time returned at 5 to 8 hours per week. That's a 14 to 23 times multiplier on your investment. I'm not claiming coaching is magic. I'm saying that when you change how you think about your work, the work itself changes. And that change shows up in your time. I want to take a moment to step out of clinical experience and into the peer-reviewed literature. Because I know this audience, you were trained to ask for evidence, and you should. The first study is from Derby and colleagues, published in JAMA Internal Medicine in 2019. It's a randomized clinical trial. 88 physicians randomly assigned to coaching or a control condition. The result was unambiguous. The physicians who received professional coaching had significantly less emotional exhaustion, fewer overall symptoms of burnout, and better quality of life and resilience. Not trend level differences, statistically significant outcomes. The second is more recent. Collett and colleagues published a systematic review in the Annals of Internal Medicine in January 2026. They looked across multiple intervention types, mindfulness programs, wellness initiatives, coaching, and found that professional coaching specifically reduces burnout among physicians, particularly when sustained beyond 4 weeks. That second finding matters because it reflects what I see in practice. A single session can create insight, but the change that lasts, the kind that affects how you practice every day, comes from sustained engagement. That is why the biweekly cadence is designed the way it is. This is not a wellness fad. The evidence is accumulating in peer-reviewed literature. Coaching works, and it works specifically for physicians. Now let me move from the research to the lived experience. What does this change actually look like in practice? It's not just what changes, but how it changes. There aren't just workflow improvements. The change that is most meaningful is moving from "I need to work harder" to "I can set limits." That's not a productivity shift. That's a shift in identity and self-understanding. And the change from feeling trapped by medical culture to practicing with values and agency. That's a physician who has remembered why they became a doctor and has found a way to practice in alignment with that reason. These shifts don't happen overnight, but in my experience, Physicians who engage seriously with coaching begin to notice changes within the first few sessions. Not because I've given them a system, but because they've started seeing their own thinking more clearly. I want to address something directly that I know physicians think about when they consider coaching. Why should I trust someone who hasn't lived this? The first differentiator is physician credibility. I'm not going to explain to you what a 70-hour week feels like, or why the EHR feels like punishment, or what it's like to carry a patient death home. I know. I lived it. And because of that, there's no translation layer between us. We can get to what matters faster. The second is approach. My coaching is not a productivity system. It's not a checklist. It's a reflective process. And that matters because physicians, in my experience, are not short on information. They're short on protected space to think. Coaching provides that space in a structured way. The third is focus. Most coaching, wellness programs, and productivity consultants address the outside of the problem. They optimize workflows, simplify systems, streamline processes. Those things have value, but they leave the inside untouched. What I found is that when the inside changes, when the beliefs and expectations and attention patterns shift, the outside often follows without much effort. Physicians start making different choices almost automatically because they're operating from a different internal framework. So, is this for you? Let's find out. Consider these 6 statements slowly. You end most days with a mental list of unfinished tasks that follows you home. You wonder why you feel behind even when you work longer hours. You entered medicine for meaning, but feel increasingly reactive to demands. You want to be more present at work and at home, but can't seem to switch off. You've tried productivity systems and they help briefly, then stop working. You sense the problem is deeper than workflow, but aren't sure where to look. If 2 or 3 of these land, if reading them produces that specific feeling of recognition, then the internal conditions for coaching are there. You don't have to be in crisis. You don't have to be burned out. You just have to sense that something in how you're working isn't sustainable and that the answer isn't more effort in the same direction. That 6th item is the one I find most telling. You sense the problem is deeper than workflow, but aren't sure where to look. That sentence is almost exactly how most of my clients describe themselves before we start working together. They know something is off. They just haven't had a guided place to investigate it. That's what coaching provides. I want to close with this sentence. Most physicians think their problem is time management. In reality, it's the unexamined expectations and attention patterns created by the culture of medicine. When physicians hear that sentence for the first time, the reaction is almost always the same. Not surprise, recognition. A kind of relief that comes from having something named accurately. That recognition is the starting point, not a conclusion, a beginning. If something in the last few minutes resonated, I'd like to offer you a discovery call. No commitment, just a conversation. We'll talk about what's going on in your practice, and I'll tell you honestly whether I think coaching is the right fit. Go to my website at gideonstrichmd.com and schedule a 30-minute discovery call to find out. Even if you sign up for coaching and decide after 1 or 2 sessions that it's just not going to work for you, there will be no further financial obligation, regardless of the coaching contract you signed. I look forward to talking with you.